Hola mi gente, it's your girl MsMalcolmHughes here, and I want to welcome y'all back to the channel where we understand that books are sometimes better than people. And today we are going to be discussing one of my all-time favorite movies, the book version, of course, Memoirs of a Geisha. Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden is a book that follows the life of a geisha. And what exactly is a geisha? I know many people, especially in North America, specifically America, and they even discuss it in the book, have a preconceived notion or a misconceived belief that geishas are prostitutes. Is that true? Is that not true? The simple answer is that no, it's not true. Geishas are defined as entertainers. They are women who are trained in Japanese art. That will include dance, music, theater, hosting, conversation, an array of topics. I was recently reading an article about this topic as well, and it comes from the Japanese government that defines what a geisha is, goes into geisha training, goes into the kiyas, and what their actual duties are. So the answer to the question of whether or not geishas are prostitutes, the answer is no, they're not. Now let's get into why they may be slaves. They may not be prostitutes, but they may be slaves. Let's talk about why. In our story, we follow a young girl by the name of Chiyo. Chiyo grows up in a rural town of Japan, far away from Kyoto or any of the main cities. It's a fisherman's port, essentially. And she grows up very poor. It's her mother, her sister, and her father. And she grows up in what she herself calls like a topsy-turvy house. It leans. So she grows up poor. The family hasn't had the easiest of times. Her father is very sad and despondent from the family, and she herself doesn't understand why. One day she realizes that it's because her father had a previous family. He had an entirely different life and everyone died and he was left alone. So this is the second family and it's hard for him. On top of that, around that same time, Chiyo's mother becomes severely sick. And this shapes her life. It kind of shifts the trajectory of her life because the realization sets in that their mother may not be around soon. Therefore, that changes the family dynamic. They're already struggling, not doing well financially. This will be a huge blow to the family. Around this same time is when something interesting happens, and Chiyo runs into Mr. Tanaka. And little does she know it at the time, but this shifts her entire life. This individual will become extremely impactful to what becomes of her after the passing of her mother, because the mother does die. You learn that pretty early on in the book. What makes Chiyo unique in her town and later on just throughout her life is that she has these striking blue-gray eyes. It's been said that she has too much water in her, and you can see it in her eyes. But this makes her unique and it makes her stand out, and she's deemed as very beautiful. Not because of her eyes, but her eyes are a attribute that really heighten her natural beauty. So after the passing of her mother, Chiyo and her sister Satsu are taken from their... Taken is not the right term. They've been sold by their father into slavery, and we'll get into the detail. I'm calling it slavery because they're calling it slavery in the book. Chiyo actually calls it slavery, and we'll get into the details of why and why I don't disagree. Because if you're talking about forced labor, well, there you have it. Mr. Tanaka acts as the middleman for Chiyo's father, who has sold them into slavery as geishas. These young girls are then taken to Kyoto, very far from their home, to be trained as geishas. Now what happens is Chiyo's sister Satsu is not deemed by the societal standards to be as beautiful as Chiyo. So while Chiyo gets to be trained as a geisha, Satsu is sold to a whorehouse. And Satsu actually does become a prostitute. So there's a difference, there's a distinction. Geishas are not prostitutes. They are deemed as, essentially you can consider them kept women. They are mistresses. They are, well, first they are entertainers. First, let's start there. They're entertainers. And then, as it's written in the book, if they're lucky, they will have a dana, and I may be pronouncing that incorrectly, I apologize, who essentially takes care of them, right? Pays for all of their trainings, their lives, because a geisha will train for her entire life. So trains for her, pays for the training, pays for kimonos, pays for housing, pays for livelihood. So if you're asking for a geisha to come to your party or come to your event, you're gonna pay an hourly wage. The dana pays the hourly wage, usually more than what the geisha will usually charge, in addition to paying for her entire livelihood, essentially. And this is because she then becomes his mistress, and then that's when the sex becomes a part of it, right? So what makes this tricky is the fact that in Chiyo's case specifically, and for a lot of young girls during that time, especially as is written in the book, she was sold by her family because they were poor, right? So she was sold into the system, and she essentially comes in indebted to the ukiyo that has purchased her, because she has to pay back the price for which they purchased her. She has to repay them for all of the training and schooling she has to go through. She has to pay them for the food, for the clothing. She also has to repay them for anything she damages, any trouble she gets in along the way. All of this is added to her debt. And once she becomes a geisha, she then has to repay the ukiyo. So all of her funds essentially go to there to repay that debt. Once she repays that debt, she then is a free person. She can go and get her own house or start her own ukiyo, or in some cases you'll be adopted by the mother of the house. You'll become the daughter, so then the ukiyo, all of your debt becomes just erased at that point. But then all of your earnings go toward the house, but you will inherit the house once the matriarch, the mother of the house, dies. It's slavery. They don't have especially for these young women in the story, which is talked about, and not all young women. Some women, they go and they get training from the age of about 14, 15 until about the age of 18, specifically to become geishas. Some women are born from geishas, and some women have mothers who are geishas, and it's passed down that way. So there's a lot of different ways, and it's not one size fits all. But in the case of Chiyo, in her life story, in her trajectory, she felt like she was sold into slavery, and because of those parameters in which her family sold her, she actually was. And she was indebted, and she had not an easy life. So we follow Chiyo on her journey or path to becoming a geisha. And it's super enlightening, it's super interesting. One thing I can say is it starts off a little slow, and this is probably because I've seen and loved the movie so much that I had to get myself out of the movie and fully invested in the book. But once I did that, it flowed smoothly and quickly. One thing I can definitely say about this book is it's well written, and there are little tidbits of knowledge dropped throughout that really make you pause and reflect and contemplate life, right? And you all know me, I am in a love affair with words. So anytime that those tidbits are dropped in and it makes me step back and pause and go, this is impactful, this is powerful, this is relevant to my life, it's always pleasurable moments for me. But here is one of my favorite moments from the book, and one of my favorite quotes to ponder over. Grief is a most peculiar thing. We're so helpless in the face of it. It's like a window that will simply open of its own accord. The room grows cold, and we can do nothing but shiver. But it opens a little less each time, and a little less. And one day, we wonder what has become of it. And it's so true. It's so true. Have you ever had those moments when you're sad? You're so sad. You are drowning in your sadness. You cannot see how you will make it through this thing, right? It's heavy on you, it's bearing on you. You cannot see your way through. You have no idea how you will make it through this. But slowly, over time, you heal, right? And the pain becomes a little less. Some days it creeps up and it's overwhelming, but it becomes a little less over time, and a little less and a little less. And you look up one day and you wonder, I don't know how I survived. I don't know how I'm still here smiling. I don't know how I'm still here joyful. I do not understand how that thing didn't take me out, right? And that's the beauty of life sometimes. I love the saying from the elders, just keep living, right? I don't know if you all have ever had an older person tell you that. Just keep living, baby. Just keep living, right? Essentially saying it will get better. And that for me is one of the most beautiful things about this book, and us getting to follow Chiyo and her story and her journey. It's full of hardships and devastations and pain, right? And once you really become invested in the story, you go through it all with her, and there are moments when you just have to put it down because you're like, oh my gosh, what is going to happen? But it's one of those stories where all things work out for the good. Throughout this story, she has one goal, right? And it's so interesting to me how you can meet one person and they change your entire life, right? You can meet a stranger and it changes everything. And that happens for her. One, when she meets Mr. Tanaka, but then also later on when she's in Kyoto and she is out one day and she's super sad and she bumps into someone, and it's someone who becomes referred to as the chairman. And he's just so kind to her. He shows her kindness where she hasn't really been shown any in so long. So she never forgets him. And all while she's training to be a geisha, though she hates it, though she's unhappy, though she knows that she is in a form of slavery, she thinks of the chairman. And if she can have a moment with the chairman, it'll all be worth it, right? This is her driving force. But we see the challenges and the turns and the twists, and we see her make good decisions and horrible, deplorable decisions where it can be argued that she betrays herself, right? And when it seems like all hope is lost, things work together and it comes together in a way that she would have desired, in the most beautiful way, even though it seemed as if her life had come to an end and everything she had worked so hard for would have been taken from her. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about this story specifically, is the story arc and the character arc. We watch her grow, we watch her develop, we watch her change and adjust. We also have these supporting characters that pour into her and make her who she is, sometimes through manipulation, right? Or horrible ways. Sometimes people treat you poorly and that shapes your character as well. How you respond, how you don't respond, right? And how you strategize. But the story arc here is so beautifully done because not only do we get her to watch her grow from a child to an adulthood, but we actually become fully invested in the character and we want to see her win. We root for her, right? And that's not always something that's done. And even the supporting characters here, so the antagonist, which in this case would be Hatsumomo, this is a story where people get what's coming to them, for good or bad. But what's so brilliant about this is even when people get their due, it's still a little heart-wrenching. You still wish that it could have been different. And I feel like this is a beautiful telling of the ups and downs and twists and turns of life that I actually thoroughly enjoyed. I really enjoyed the book. If there were any negatives to be said about this book, again, pacing. It was a little slow to start with. A little slow. And not only was it a little slow, though the characters themselves are well written and you become easily invested in them, it's sometimes a little frustrating that we don't really get to know these characters' hopes and desires. And I think that is done intentionally, right? If you are a geisha, or if you are someone who is in the industry of service to others, right, then it's not really about you. But there are aspirations, there are desires that drive you. And even though these women are geisha and are trained to be entertainers for important men, right, they still had their own goals and desires. And there were moments when I wished that we could have delved into that a little bit more. We do get to know Chiyo, we get to know her desires, we get to know what's driving her toward becoming a highly ranked geisha, but what were really her goals when she was a child, right? What did she dream of, right? What happened to her sister? We never really know. What was it that really pushed Hatsumomo to be as venomous as she is, right? Also, Mameha, right? There are moments, and Mameha becomes Chiyo's big sister. She's the one who trains her up and introduces her, kind of when you think of a cotillion or you're coming out, right? Where it's the announcement of like, this is such and such, and they should be revered in this manner because they're associated with me. So Mameha is a renowned geisha in Japan. So in that sense, Chiyo is very lucky to have her as a big sister. Eventually we learn how, and again, hindsight is 2020, and you really see how all the pieces are working together for her good, even though she has no awareness of this. And until she learns, we don't have a full awareness of this either. We just get to see like some pettiness behind the scenes, and it's hinted that this is what's driving these individuals to assist her or to be unkind to her. But I think that a little bit more insight into the characters' innate desires, what they were forced to give up or abandon, dreams deferred, just, I think those details would have made a really good book, a great book. So I think it would have just taken it just a notch higher than where it already sits. One individual that we kind of get some insight into her is Pumpkin, and Pumpkin is a young girl around Chiyo's age when she gets to the Okiya, is already there. So they kind of grew up together, and initially they're friends. And when Chiyo has her challenges, it appears that Pumpkin is going to go forward and be a revered geisha, while Chiyo isn't yet having that opportunity. But things change, right? Luck changes. Two of my favorite quotes. So one thing about them tables, they always turn, and eventually the pendulum swings. And that's kind of what happens here. So there is some tension between them. But one thing, again, we don't really get into it too deeply, right? We're dropped in at one point when Pumpkin does this huge act of betrayal towards Chiyo, and you kind of get introduced to some of the venom and frustration and jealousy that Pumpkin has been harboring over all these years. But Chiyo was unaware, and Chiyo showed up sincere and with honest kindness, right? So that's a little bit frustrating. So we definitely watch our protagonist grow through multiple betrayals on every level, from family to friendship, and even a betrayal of self. So in that, I think it's a well done book. I think it is really enlightening about a culture that many people don't understand. It's not easy to get insight into. It's a very like exclusive club in a sense. So just to have someone who's thoroughly studied it, and to have this perspective, I thought it was interesting. Is it 100% accurate in its depiction of geisha culture? Probably not. I would even argue it's probably highly not. Because anything written from an experience that is not your first-hand experience, right? You're probably not going to get 100% right, and it's probably going to be wrong and inaccurate. So that's a given. But I think that it's well done, and I think that it's enlightening, and I think that it feels like it was done with care. And that's one thing I really appreciate about this book. It's written with a reverence for the culture, and I really appreciate that, and that shines through. So I definitely enjoyed reading it. I think it's worth picking up. And I think that the book, like most cases, is better than the film. The book even goes beyond the ending of the film and shows what happens after that moment where her dream becomes a realization. And I think that again makes it so much more meaningful. So for me, it was enjoyable, and finally reading the book behind one of my all-time favorite movies made it even more so. So if I had to give this book a grade on a scale of A to F, it would be a B. And it would be a B because, again, I think it's well done, right? But those pieces that I touched on and ways in which it could have been improved to make these women even more well-rounded characters and having more insight into their development, I think would have pushed this to an A easily. That is my review of Memoirs of a Geisha. Have you all read it? Do you plan on reading it? Have you seen the movie? Did you enjoy it? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, until next time, please remember to give time and to have the best day of your life on purpose. Also, for those of you inquiring, I do still have buttons, my MsMalcolmHughes pins, and the details on how to get those are below.